Hello everyone. The title of today's episode is Your Being Does the Action. Be and you shall be aware of all that is being done. And so where I would like to begin is by telling you that when you are in a natural state of being, you begin to see that your awareness, without having to move in an instant, becomes aware of all that is being done. I want you to, for a moment, visualize yourself and a bunch of runners. And you and these runners are all running together, But suddenly you choose to stop and you see all the runners have gone. And this kind of solitude is not the solitude of just being physically lonely. This is the solitude of seeing your world pass you by. And every human being goes through this to begin to get a more accurate sense of where existential clarity really is. Again, be and you shall be aware of all that is being done. And to kind of zoom in what I really mean by what you become aware is being done, is that you will suddenly get an existential sensitivity that is it's like you begin to see all actions based on how you are considering them can be put in a spectrum of intensity from subtle to gross. So some experiences, based on how you are positioned here, have this certain range of experience. These have this other range of experience. And to kind of say this very playfully, visualize an artist just taking some paint and just throwing it on the canvas. And what we see is that some points it's very intense and some points it's not. What that means is probably the most intense moments you've experienced in your life, you've gone through them. So you were aware of how reality was during suffering, and you're also aware of reality after the suffering. And to some degree, it is self-communication. A being who truly understands this experience of existence, which is humanity, to be something that is originating within you, this sense of knowing within does not even need a location. You will become situated in a knowing that it knows by being, by a sense of being that is aware of all action by not trying to be. Do you get it? We're not trying to be as an idea. We are just simply seeing that in our silence, I really began to truly hear what others said. Your being does the action. What that means is my whole life I was trying to make the perfect to-do list, and I would make the perfect to-do list, but the next moment I would totally forget that I had. No. I had forgot totally that I had, made that awesome to-do list. So awesomeness is as temporal as the person who's being awesome. Do you see? So to really be awesome, we have to be an acknowledgement greater than how our past is acknowledged before. So what that means, to some degree, I am getting rid of my selflessness, and I'm going to go see what every person who has lived before me, what the greatest thoughts are on the table. And then I will, with the vision of what I am able to be, be gravitated towards that action. But it's all in how you're working with yourself. I guess the most important thing you got to realize is that you are, even though people call it, spiritual search, searching your existential longing, just your urge to know more about who you are, regardless of that, you are steering this ship. You are the pilot of your consciousness. And so you are navigating in a plane of existence. You are walking in parks, looking around, noticing greener pastures that don't seem as green as where man's absolute experience is. Because, there's two other kind of locations, There's one way of, an exit, which is an exit from one form into another form, and there's an exit from form into non-form. But this sense of not being form is that when you search your I don't knows, they seem to lead to some knowing. So when you, in one instant, very sincerely and honestly, just observe who you are and your nature of being, you will see that you will be guided by your presence. Your personality would be guided by your awareness of presence. And your awareness of presence is that divine sacred quality. And the reason we use the words divine and sacred is not to put it in some ideology, but to say that it cannot be touched by interpretation. Because it is an experience of man with his world, where the world is within his experience. It is within him. So perhaps Mr. Within, such a name is suggesting who is within you. What is within your eyes? Who is looking out? And see if it has to always be a who. Or can this sense of who turn into humanity? Can you begin breathing as a member of the human species? And what that really means is that before you can find the best route to a peaceful world, a successful world, you must look at the world. You must not ignore your problems. It is not about trying to create a problem dynamic scenario and try to, change the world and make it into a better place. No. It is about the experience that is instantly here and how much it is able. And you would see that when I'm saying your being does the action, because you can take your state of consciousness is naturally gravitating to a point where all these errands you're making want to be done in an instant. There is an urge for you to whatever job you're doing in your life to do it in an instant, What that means is perhaps a very good quality of the working man was that he would not lie to himself because he was engaged in the work. So what that means is they can fire you from the work that you're doing if you're hired in a company, but they cannot fire you from your work when you are there, present as who you are, and you're just with your focus into life doing what you're doing. Do you see? No one can fire you, do you know, from the life's work that you're here to do. What that means is there's going to be excitement. There's also going to be fluctuations in this excitement, but begin cultivating things in new ways and begin developing new steps. What that means is when life pushes you to a corner and you're like, you can't take any steps, after realizing and trying to see if it's really real that you can't take any steps, you're like, no. When you're in the corner, when you're on the edge, when you have failed, you have gone to the depth of the end that you will give you the revelation of a new beginning in your endeavor. And so it's very important to see that it's like a state of flow, and I'm going to give you two views of this. One view, I'm going to tell you kind of what it is. In another view, I'm going to kind of suggest how it's going to appear in your lifestyle based on my own experience, based on Mr. Within's experience of what I mean by this kind of, I guess, flow and sense of being that is the actions all being done. All right, so let's begin to see it like this. When we look at reality being about, in a sense, self-communication, we consider who is communicating and what is being communicated. But as we are constantly going through an experience of communication, we begin to realize it doesn't have to be a location. That means we've been thinking that movement has been from one location to another location. But no, there are also movements from visible locality into a more of a sense of an invisible locality. What that means is your subtler planes of thought will open up to you. You will begin to see that your creativity is coming at an immense where it will overwhelm you, but then you would begin to see as such an overwhelming inspiration hits you, wherever it is, it's something maybe you have observed in the edge of your eye to bring back into the front of man's eyes, you know. So, whatever you're drawn by, begin to draw it in a manner that you're seeing your presence is it. So unlike the to-do list, we don't want to make a to-do list. We want to make a to-be list. And when you make this to-be list, at the end of it, you know what the point of this to-be list is? For at the end of it, you rip this paper and be how ridiculous it is you're trying to make a list. You know? That's the end goal of a to-be list. You realize you are that which you envision. And even though there's a transition between subtler planes of conception, your attention is beyond it, and that is why it is granted movement. What that means is when you went into that empty symphony hall, you know, you realize that that space was an implication of everywhere you could move to in that room, you know. So what that means is absence seems to draw in a sense of fulfillment. And when we look at our state of awareness, when we want to do acts, it's as if we are projecting a world of non-fulfillment, then seeking the fulfillment. And so it seems our intuition's like a bit upside down, because innately we are fulfilled always by the gratefulness we have to be the moment of experience we are. We are experiencing life. It's very fabulous, you know, it's amazing. And do not be ignorant enough to create a setting of incapability when there is none, you know. Of course, to some degree, I'm going to guide you in a manner where you are always your own guidance, not anyone external. So once you observe externality, you get a consideration of internality, but when you're simultaneously aware of both, you have already transitioned to your world of worlds. But your expression does not mean it has to move. What that means is just because I'm aware of those cells in my body, you know, which my whole body is a greater intelligence that is keeping them, those cells don't have to leave. You don't have to get rid of anything. Life is transitioning on its own, you know. What that means is the tree, the leaves on the tree in front of my yard, regardless of how much I wanted them to stay green, you know, they fell. Fall came. A season happened, you know. Oh, man. So I guess in a manner where I could say, in regards to lifestyle, it would come to you in the sense that you feel more sensitive. You will at first, this is a sign of a being who is becoming aware of the moment as consciousness rather than a body which is a certain aspect of the moment, you know. We want to assume we have the ability of infinite consideration because our eyes are open. But at the same time, as we have this, we begin to see man is creating one sense of infinity based on what he knows, but it seems that infinity is also kept in the unknown. So how can man know his unknown? This is the biggest question. And you would see, this is where, if you trust life, both its known and unknown aspects, rather than just trusting its known aspects and not trusting its unknown aspects, you would see there is a natural balance not being allowed to be maintained because you are constantly going back to the ideas that conditioned you into the conviction that you have become now. But how convinced are you by yourself? Assume there is no one else. Assume you are your greatest bully. Assume that you are in an island and there's no one else. Who would look in your eyes? And that transparency is the ability to not just transcend thought, but to be able to be a collective knowing that allows any form of individualization to happen. So my understanding actually increased when I reduced the terminals of interpretation. So I would have so many things that I would compare, but I would realize comparison is just like how an artist can draw something and compare it to the empty page. Do you see? You know? It's anyways. What that means is you don't try to have too many ideas on life. You reduce the ideas. You actually think of ideas as visitors who are coming to communicate to you in your moment of experience, right? These visitors, sometimes they don't have to always bother you. You got to realize your task is to be in a sense of flow towards a greater experience. What that means is your day should become more gentler and graceful. It doesn't mean the activities are reducing. It just means your experience is becoming gentler because you are beginning to allow things to change as they are. So if you see that, if you don't constantly try to keep your sense of personality or keep your idea of you in a certain way, eventually during time, based on the nature of the activities you're going to get involved in and the steps you're going to take, your personality is going to change because a totally different person will be standing. So what that means is, just like how old you are now, visualize yourself, for example, 5 years ago and how you were a totally different sense of being. And so now you are constantly going, and not that that sense of being is not there, it still walks in your memory, but it is a suggestion, and you must see that there's always a new suggestion. You know? This is why there's an importance to be aware of novelty in the human experience. Because that is when you're not trying to know, or you're not trying to tell someone they don't know. You are. And your innate sense of how you are part of this world, as by design, even before they can judge you, just by the nature of how you're breathing in this reality. You are the gift that you have always been opening. You would begin to see that ideology put a sense of certainty before we had a chance to experience some things. What that means is, would you consider someone who Googles skydiving images on, in Google and just sees those and thinks he's a skydiver? Would you rather see someone to be a skydiver who jumps out of this, plane and, feels the limitless sky? The intensity of the action will always be monitored by an eternal sense of being. What that means is whatever action you do, whatever work you try to do, you see that you will at the end of it be, because it's a temporal effort to touch eternity. But when you see that you cannot touch eternity, and it's not an immortality in regards to trying to just keep a physical domain active. Immortality was an illusion for the caterpillar, but a reality for the butterfly. You are the butterfly because you have gone through the self-transformation of an animalistic view into an animal who can notice itself in a mirror. And this animal who can notice itself in a mirror has noticed not just itself, but all the other animals in the same mirror, But it seems that regardless of what we do, our being was the truth. And you'd begin to see synchronicities maybe increasing. What I mean by synchronicities when I use that word, it's really a personal thing. But what it is that you as an individual look at your world and you are becoming more aware and seeing a bit more depth in the images that were very routine and normal to you. So your normal is changing because you're bored. You know, which is it's a very funny thing. So as you kind of flow in this river of evolution, you would see all synchronicities are suggesting a self-reflective quality in how you're observing the moment. So I am not just talking to a you who is your idea or someone who's lived in a certain way. I am speaking to you as a moment of experience and existence right now, as a moment of being that is alive. I am speaking to you as life. And these are all sounds of life. I am just communicating as life, but you are receiving it. So it is the reception that enables the conception. But it seems that if you only go with the conception, you cannot reach the reception. Do you see? Because you received it in a certain way. And so how fluid is your certainty to write 10,000 books and to be able to, in an instant, throw them in the light of 10,000 suns? What that means is the knowledge you carry actually carries you into the reality of how the image is designed. Or how some people have considered there's a meme, there's a shape to the idea, which is something which the conception has brought it. What that means is when I put a vase, let's visualize like a vase or something. I don't know. Let's visualize a vase on the table. So we begin to see this vase is there on the table, but at the same time, because we're aware that the vase can fall, there's a consideration of the vase's, let's say, flexibility. So it's as if we already know something before we need to know something as it happens. Before the vase is suddenly, let's say, thrown down. And what that kind of suggests is, on some level, we are all these ideas and all these bodies of both physical consideration and bodies of thought, but the awareness to the body is never of the body. So the mind was free when the body did not just see itself as one body. And that's why perhaps love has a very infinite evolutionary twist to it. I had to make a choice in my life. And of course this was a choice in one moment. I make choices every day. But, but I had to make a choice in my life to look at everything around me and trust it or not trust it. And I remember being very young, very, very young, I was very young. And when something would bother me, I would just go in my bed, just turn off the light, and just sit in that darkness and just be aware of my thoughts, And then I did not realize what afterwards I did, that I was being to be aware of the action. So when Mr.Within suggests that you go in nature and just sit still and silent and just observe the life you are, is because in being you would see that what is being done and what is being done as your being. So regardless of whoever you are as a human being, this is Mr. Within's very interesting suggestion that any moment you could just reduce the intensity of your movement and just calibrate, you know? So what that means is if I've been agitated, angry, shouting, something like that, I would immediately recommend going and experiencing silence and stillness. So you immediately observe the ideas in a much more, not per se deeper, but more attentive intensity. And similarly, if you're someone who's constantly been, let's say the other side of the spectrum actually works too. If you're someone who's very silent or still your whole life, and let's say you've never done anything, you've just been silent and still, you'd begin to see you would need also a balance of movement. So if you are constantly at home and not moving around too much, I would recommend begin moving, and if you can't move with someone, if you don't have anyone you know how to move with, begin running. Go outside and begin running around, Move this physical system, You might even see me in the park somewhere. In an instant, you know yourself when you trust life. And trust is at first an abstract concept, but it's really where your direct experience is at. Are you comfortable with what you're seeing? And when you see that you don't need a yes or no answer, because regardless, you're still seeing, A free being has freedom like a seed in its design. Beyond the conceptualization that made us too solid to be, too solid to see, let's forget about the to-do lists and observe the nature of all being. Much blessings and namaste.